dedicated to those who believe in justice, even when it isn't given freely. I want you to imagine a road, forgotten, cracked, and empty. It stretches for miles, a ribbon of dust and broken dreams slicing through sun-scorched fields. There's no traffic, no noise, just the relentless hum of cicadas and the heat hanging heavy like judgment. Now, put a man on that road, a man driving slow, steady, like someone with nowhere urgent to be, or like someone who's learned not to hurry in a world that rarely welcomes him. His name is Omar Lewis, and today will be a day he'll never forget. Omar's an impressive man if you know his story. Mid-50 seconds, sharp as a blade. A federal judge, a position earned with sweat and years, not handed down like an heirloom. The kind of man who walks into a courtroom and silences it just by being there. But titles don't follow you everywhere. On this road, in this light, he's just a black man in an old silver Toyota Camry, driving a little too carefully for someone else's liking. Let me paint you the scene. Omar sits in the driver's seat, the lines of his face softened by evening light. His suit, charcoal gray, neat but wrinkled, tells you he's been working all day. On the passenger seat next to him, there's a leather briefcase, neatly packed legal files, and a small bouquet of daisies wrapped in paper. You'd think it was a quiet, tender evening, a man going home to celebrate something simple but meaningful. And maybe it would have been, if not for the red and blue lights that exploded behind him, sudden and blinding. Imagine that moment. The flash in the rearview mirror, the sharp wail of a siren splitting the silence like a knife. For Omar, it's familiar, too familiar. His hands tighten on the wheel for just a second before he takes a breath, calm and deliberate, like a man who's practiced for this. He signals, pulls the car gently to the side, and waits. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispers, "Here we go again." Two men get out of the cruiser. The first one, Wes Carter, walks like he owns the place. Mid-30 seconds, built thick and broad, with a buzz cut and a smirk that sits heavy on his face. He's the kind of man who loves authority and lets you know it. Trailing behind him is Adam Reese, younger, leaner, and wearing the kind of uneasy look that says he hasn't been here long enough to be comfortable. The gravel crunches under Carter's boots as he strides toward Omar's window. Reese hesitates by the cruiser, his gaze darting nervously from the car to the road, like he wants to be anywhere but here. Carter bends down and leans into the window. "Afternoon, sir," he says, his tone dripping with the kind of false politeness you can't quite trust. "Know why I pulled you over?" Omar looks at him, his face steady, unreadable. "No, officer," he says quietly. "I don't." Carter's smirk widens. It's the kind of smile that promises trouble. "You were driving a little slow back there. That's dangerous." Dangerous. Omar could argue, but he doesn't. He knows the rules of this game. Stay calm, stay quiet. Don't give them a reason. So instead, he nods. Carter holds out a hand. License and registration. Omar moves slowly, deliberately, every action calculated, because he knows what happens when movements are too quick. He pulls his wallet from his jacket, retrieves his driver's license, and hands it over without a word. Carter takes the ID and doesn't even glance at it. Instead, his eyes shift to the passenger seat, the flowers, the briefcase. "What's in the bag?" Omar's voice doesn't waver. "Flowers, for my wife." Carter straightens up. The smirk never leaves his face. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." There it is. A flicker of something dark passes through Omar's eyes, but it's gone almost as soon as it appears. He doesn't argue. Arguing doesn't help. Slowly, he opens the door and steps out onto the gravel, straightening his suit jacket as he rises. "I want you to remember this moment." Omar Lewis, a federal judge, standing on the side of an empty road with his hands loose by his sides. The sun is sinking lower now, bleeding into the horizon. Behind him, the lights of the police cruiser flash red and blue, painting his silhouette in flickering colors. Carter circles the car like a predator. "Mind if I take a look inside?" he asks, though it's not really a question. "I do, actually," Omar says evenly. Carter's smirk vanishes. Something cold flashes behind his eyes. "You're refusing a search?" Omar doesn't move. "I believe I'm within my rights." Carter steps closer, his voice dropping low. "Rights don't mean much out here. What happens next is the kind of thing people only talk about in hushed voices." Omar stands there, still as stone, as Carter turns to Reese. "Cuff him." Reese freezes. "Wes, I don't think we—" "Cuff him, Reese," Carter snaps. The hesitation lasts only a second before Reese moves, his hands shaking slightly as he pulls the cuffs from his belt. Omar doesn't resist as his wrists are pulled behind his back, and the cold metal bites into his skin. He just closes his eyes for a moment, as if collecting himself. Carter turns to the Camry, yanking the door open and rummaging through its contents. The briefcase is tossed carelessly onto the gravel, papers spilling out like secrets. The flowers follow, landing in the dirt with a soft, pitiful thud. Reese watches, his face pale. "Wes, maybe we should call this in." Carter ignores him. He holds up Omar's briefcase, shaking it. "What is this, huh? Something you're hiding?" Omar says nothing. He just watches. But then something happens. A sound breaks through the scene. A low, distant rumble. Carter looks up. Down the road comes a black SUV, its tires humming over the asphalt like a promise. It glides to a stop behind the cruiser, and for the first time, Carter's smirk falters. The SUV door opens, and out steps Captain Marcus Harris. He's tall, clean-cut, with the kind of presence that silences a room. His gaze sweeps the scene. Omar in cuffs, Carter by the car, the briefcase and flowers scattered on the ground. Harris doesn't ask questions. He marches straight up to Carter, his voice cold and sharp. "What the hell is going on here?" Carter straightens. "Sir, this is police business." Harris cuts him off with a look that could freeze fire. Then he turns to Omar, his voice softening. "Judge Lewis, are you all right? If you're interested, don't forget to subscribe and like it." And just like that, everything changes. The tension hangs in the air like a storm about to break. Carter stares at Captain Marcus Harris, frozen mid-breath, his smirk gone and his face paling as understanding crashes over him. "Judge?" Carter mutters, the words stumbling out of his mouth like something he can't quite believe. Harris doesn't even acknowledge him. Instead, he steps toward Omar, who stands tall despite the handcuffs biting into his wrists. "Judge Lewis," Harris says again, his voice laced with a quiet respect that makes Carter flinch. "Let's get you out of these." He turns sharply toward Reese. "Unlock him, now." Reese doesn't hesitate this time. He fumbles with the key, hands shaking as he unlocks the cuffs and pulls them away. Omar slowly brings his arms forward, flexing his wrists. He doesn't say a word, doesn't even rub the raw red marks on his skin. Captain Harris turns back to Carter, stepping into his space so deliberately that Carter instinctively takes a half step back. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Harris's voice is low and hard like iron. "You just put your hands on a federal judge, a man who has served this country with more honor than you'll see in a lifetime." Carter blinks, opens his mouth to defend himself, but nothing comes out. He looks like a man who's been caught mid-fall, reaching for something that isn't there. "Sir, I didn't know," Carter stammers. "You didn't know?" Harris cuts him off, his voice sharp. "Because you didn't bother to ask, because you assumed." Behind Harris, Omar speaks for the first time since the handcuffs came off. "Thank you, Captain," he says quietly. His tone is calm, measured, but there's no mistaking the steel beneath the words. "I think we're done here." Omar's gaze lingers on Carter for just a moment. It isn't anger that flashes in his eyes, it's something worse, disappointment. Harris insists on driving Omar back to the city. The interior of the SUV is pristine, the silence inside heavy but not uncomfortable. Omar sits in the passenger seat, his briefcase and the crushed bouquet carefully placed at his feet. For a while, neither man speaks. The SUV hums steadily over the road, carrying them back toward civilization. Finally, Harris breaks the silence. "I'm sorry about that, sir." Carter's not. "Don't apologize for him," Omar interrupts quietly, staring out the window. "It's not just him." Harris's hands tighten on the wheel, but he says nothing. "You're a good man, Captain," Omar continues, his voice soft but resolute. "But you and I both know this isn't about one officer or one incident. It's about a system that rewards men like Carter for looking at someone like me and seeing a threat." Harris exhales slowly, his shoulders slumping just slightly. "You're right." Omar turns to look at him, his expression unreadable. "What happens to him?" Harris's jaw tightens. "I'll handle it." "Good," Omar says. He leans back in his seat, closing his eyes. "I've seen too many men walk away from this kind of thing, without consequence. What happened on that desolate road could have ended there. A private humiliation. Another story told in whispers between friends and families. But nothing stays private anymore. Not in this world. A bystander, someone miles away, perhaps watching through binoculars or parked on the edge of the fields, filmed it all. The video goes viral overnight, spreading like wildfire across social media. The footage is shaky but damning. The snap of handcuffs, Carter's smug face, the moment Captain Harris arrives and the tables turn. Headlines explode. Federal judge wrongfully detained on highway stop. Abuse of power. Viral video sparks outrage. Judge Omar Lewis speaks out against systemic bias. On screens across America, Omar's face becomes a symbol. A man of quiet dignity, caught in an ugly, familiar moment. People dissect the footage, frame by frame, arguing, accusing, defending, demanding. While the world rages on, Omar sits alone in his small, quiet study. A single lamp casts warm light over the room, illuminating shelves of law books and framed photos, moments of family and career. The bouquet of daisies sits in a glass vase on the desk. The stems are bent and snapped, but Omar has placed them carefully in the water, as though willing them to survive. Omar stares at the flowers, his hands resting loosely on the arms of his chair. His face is calm, but his eyes betray the weight he carries. A faint knock sounds at the door. "Come in," Omar calls. The door opens, and his wife, Sarah Lewis, steps into the room. She's a graceful woman in her early 50s, with kind eyes that seem to see straight through him. She takes one look at the flowers, then at Omar, and sighs softly. "They didn't deserve you," she says quietly. Omar smiles faintly, though the humor doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe not, but they needed to see me." Sarah crosses the room and sits on the edge of the desk. For a long moment, the two of them just sit there in silence, the world outside feeling very far away. Finally, Sarah reaches out and rests a hand on Omar's shoulder. "Are you going to say something?" Omar looks up at her, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know yet," he says, "but if I do, it won't be for me. It'll be for the next man they pull over, the one without a title to protect him." Sarah nods, her gaze steady. "Then you'll know what to say." Days later, Omar agrees to a televised interview, not to rage or accuse, but to speak a quiet truth that resonates far louder than anger ever could. On screen, he sits calmly across from a news anchor, his posture straight, his voice steady. "This isn't about me," Omar says. "I'm a judge. I'm privileged in ways that many aren't. But what happened to me happens to men and women across this country every single day. People without cameras to film it. People who don't make the news." He looks directly into the camera, as though speaking to someone unseen, someone out there. We cannot keep pretending this isn't happening. We cannot keep telling ourselves that a badge is a shield against accountability. The clip goes viral, not for its outrage, but for its simplicity, for the truth in it. In his small study, Omar places the daisies, now wilted, into the trash bin and replaces them with fresh ones. Outside, the sound of life continues. Car engines, voices of neighbors, a world moving forward. Omar stands by the window, watching as a group of kids ride their bikes down the street, their laughter carried on the breeze. He lets out a slow breath. The fight isn't over, it never is, but sometimes it's enough to make them look, to make them see. If you found this interesting, be sure to subscribe to the channel and listen to the full story. And if you've seen or experienced something similar, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. All the best to you.